The dim hum of the colony ship's engines vibrated through the bulkheads like a distant heartbeat, a relentless reminder that they were still light years from anywhere that mattered. Captain Alara Voss leaned against the observation deck's railing, her fingers tracing the cold metal edge as she stared into the void. Stars streaked by in false color on the holoscreen, but her mind lingered on the crew vote she'd just overseen. It had passed unanimously, bold, decisive, the kind of call that bound them tighter as a family out here. Relocate the landing site on Epsilon Eridani 4. Skip the preliminary surveys to shave months off the timeline. Resources were tight, morale tighter. Everyone craved solid ground underfoot sooner. She could still hear the cheers echoing from the mess hall. But now, alone with the stars, a knot twisted in her gut. Alara pushed it down. She was the brave one, the steady hand. No room for second thoughts when 60 souls depended on her grit. Lieutenant Kai Ren approached from the corridor, his steps light but purposeful, the wiry frame of a man who'd grown up in zero-G hauling crates. He carried a tablet, its screen glowing with preliminary data feeds. Captain, the NAV teams run the sims. We'll hit Atmo in 48 hours if we push the engines. Smooth ride, they say. Alara turned, forcing a nod. Kai was the cautious type, always double-checking seals and plotting contingencies, but even he had voted yes. His dark eyes held a flicker of doubt now, though, or maybe she was projecting. Any glitches in the readings? She asked, keeping her voice even. He hesitated, thumbing the tablet. Nothing major. Just, the planet's got some odd magnetic interference. Could scramble comms on descent. But we've got redundancies. He met her gaze, the camaraderie between them unspoken but solid, two veterans who'd patched hull breaches together more than once. She clapped his shoulder, feeling the familiar tension in his muscles. Good. Rally the team for a final briefing. We're making history here, Kai. No turning back. As he left, Alara lingered, watching a nebula swirl lazily on the screen. The vote had felt right in the moment, a surge of human ingenuity against the endless black. But regret? That was a luxury for later if they survived the landing. The hum of the engines vibrated through the deck plating as Elena gripped the railing of the observation deck, staring out at the swirling nebula that now dominated their view. It had been less than a day since the vote, and already the ship's corridors buzzed with a tension that no amount of recycled air could mask. She could feel it in the way the crew moved, quicker steps, sidelong glances, like they were all waiting for the other shoe to drop. The nebula wasn't just a pretty light show, it was a graveyard of ionized gas and rogue magnetic fields, the kind that could fry sensors and scramble NAV systems before you even blinked. Beside her, Marcus leaned against the bulkhead, his wiry frame coiled like a spring. He was the cautious one, always had been, the engineer who'd argued longest against cutting through the nebula to shave weeks off their journey to Epsilon Eridani. Told you, he muttered, not looking at her. His voice carried that dry edge, the wit he wielded like a tool to deflect worry. Vote passes easy when the captain dangles promises of home sooner. Regret? That creeps in with the static. Elena shot him a glance, her fingers tightening on the rail. She was the pilot, the brave one who trusted gut instinct over readouts, and she'd been the swing vote in the end. We needed the time savings. Supplies are tight, Marcus. Another delay, and we'd be rationing oxygen, not just protein packs. But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her. The nebula loomed larger now, tendrils of purple and gold reaching out like fingers, and the first faint interference crackled over the comms. Down in the engine room, Kira wiped sweat from her brow, her hands buried in a panel of flickering diagnostics. She was the heart of the crew, the medic with a steady hand and a laugh that could cut through panic, but today her focus was laser-sharp on the readouts. The magnetic flux was building faster than predicted, pulling at the hull like an invisible tide. Javier, reroute power to the shields, she called over her shoulder, her voice calm but urgent. Javier, the young navigator with his endless optimism, nodded and punched in the commands, his fingers flying across the console. It started small, a tremor that rattled the loose bolts in Kira's toolkit. Then the lights dimmed and the alarms began their low whine. Flux spike incoming, Javier said, his usual grin faltering as he watched the screens. The nebulous fields were twisting the ship's electromagnetic bubble, and their early plan to skim the edge was unraveling. Kira slammed the panel shut and grabbed a harness, clipping it to the deck. "Hold on. This is going to shake us like a maraca." Up on the bridge, Elena felt the ship buck beneath her feet, the controls fighting her as the artificial gravity wavered. Marcus burst through the hatch, his face smeared with grease from a hasty repair below. "Shields at 60% and dropping. We need to pull back, Elena, now." She hesitated, eyes locked on the viewport where the nebula's glow pulsed mockingly. Pulling back meant admitting the vote was a mistake, meant longer days on dwindling rations, meant the crew's fragile morale cracking wide open. But staying meant gambling everything on a path that was closing around them like a vice. The ship lurched again, harder this time, sending tools skittering across the floor. Elena's hands steadied on the yoke, her mind racing through alternatives. "Kira, status?" she barked into the comm. "Engine straining," came the reply, laced with strain. "We lose another 10% and we're dead in the water." Marcus crossed his arms, his wit giving way to grim resolve. "Your call, pilot. But if we don't adapt, that vote's going to be the last thing we regret." Elena nodded, a plan forming in the chaos. Divert auxiliary power to create a localized field buffer, buy them time to punch through the thinnest part. It was risky, untested, but it was theirs. She keyed the command, the ship groaning in protest as they committed to the dive. The nebula swallowed them whole, and in that moment, the weight of the choice settled like lead in her chest. The wind howled across the jagged ridges of Epsilon 9, carrying flecks of abrasive dust that stung like needles against exposed skin. Elena crouched behind a boulder, her gloved fingers tightening around the makeshift probe she jury-rigged from salvage parts. The vote back on the shuttle had been unanimous. Land here, claim the mineral deposits, beat the corporate scouts to the punch. Easy choice with the promise of riches and a new start. But now, 3 days in, the reality clawed at them like the planet's unforgiving terrain. "Any readings yet?" Marco's voice crackled over the comm, laced with that dry edge he used to mask worry. He was back at the base camp, a flimsy dome half buried in the red soil, monitoring their dwindling power cells. Cautious as ever, he'd argued for more scans before touchdown, but enthusiasm had drowned him out. "Nothing but static," Elena replied, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet. She jabbed the probe deeper into the cracked ground, watching the faint LED flicker. The air recyclers hummed unevenly, a reminder that their suits wouldn't hold forever without resupply. Lila, the geologist, had pinpointed this ridge as the jackpot, veins of rare thorium just beneath the surface. But the first drill attempt had sheared off at 20 meters, snapped by some unseen pressure fault. A shadow fell over her as Lila crested the rise, her suit's packed thrusters leaving a faint trail of exhaust. The younger woman moved with that boundless energy, her visor reflecting the double sun's harsh glare. "Elena, we've got company. Corporate drone 2 clicks east. It's mapping the same sector." Elena's jaw set. The rivals from Helix Corp had been a ghost threat during the vote, distant, beatable. Now they were real, their automated scouts probing the same desperate stakes. If Helix claimed the thorium first, the crew's payout evaporated, leaving them stranded with debts and no ride home. "Can we jam it?" Lila shook her head, pulling a scanner from her belt. Her fingers danced over the controls, quick and sure, revealing the trait that had earned her the spot on this ragtag mission. Ingenuity born of quiet desperation. "Not with what we've got." The jammers fried from the landing quake. "But if we reroute the base's auxiliary power?" A low rumble interrupted her, vibrating through the rock. Elena steadied herself as pebbles skittered down the slope. The planet's infamous quakes, tidal forces from its wonky orbit, struck without mercy. This one built slow, a deep groan rising from the earth. "Back to camp," Elena barked, yanking the probe free. They scrambled down the incline, boots slipping on loose scree. The rumble peaked, and the ground buckled, swallowing the boulder Elena had sheltered behind in a yawning fissure. Dust billowed, choking the air, and for a heartbeat she lost sight of Lila. They burst into the dome just as the quake subsided, seals hissing as the door pressurized. Marco was already at the console, his face pale under the emergency lights. That was a 4-pointer. Structural integrity at 70%. And the drone? Is veered off, probably spooked. But our drill site's gone. Buried. Elena stripped off her helmet, running a hand through sweat-matted hair. The air inside smelled of ozone and recycled fear. We adapt. Lila talked me through that power reroute. If we can't drill, we find another vein. Lila nodded, sketching a hasty diagram on the communal tablet. Her optimism flickered like a stubborn flame, but Marco's eyes narrowed. And if the next quake hits during? We're down to one shuttle, one shot. That vote was for glory, not graves. The words hung heavy, the first crack in their camaraderie. Outside, the wind whispered regrets across the fractured land, as the suns dipped toward a bruised horizon. Elena met their gazes, her resolve hardening. They'd pushed this far on grit. Backing down now meant losing everything. But as the aftershocks trembled faintly underfoot, she wondered if the cost was already tallying higher than they'd bargained for. The dim glow of the habitat's emergency lights cast long shadows across the control room, turning the scattered consoles into jagged silhouettes. Elena wiped sweat from her brow, her fingers leaving a streak of grime on her skin. The air recyclers hummed erratically, struggling against the rising humidity that seeped in from the cracked outer hull. She glanced at Marcus, who was hunched over the makeshift repair bench, his tools clinking softly as he probed the damaged power coupling. "We can't keep patching like this," Marcus muttered, not looking up. His voice carried the weight of too many sleepless shifts, but his hands moved with the steady precision of someone who'd fixed worse on Earthside rigs. "The vote got us here, pushing into the rift for those mineral deposits, but the seismic activity is chewing through our reserves faster than we can map." Elena nodded, leaning against the bulkhead. The rift, that jagged tear in the planet's crust they'd spotted from orbit, had promised salvation, rare isotopes to fuel their generators and trade with the orbital station. The colony's assembly had passed the expedition proposal in a landslide, everyone desperate after months of blackouts and rationed heat. But now, 3 days in, the ground trembled every hour, and their rover's undercarriage was a mangled mess from the last rockslide. From the comms panel, a crackle broke the tension. "Elena, you copy? This is Jax from the forward scout post." The young geologist's voice was tight, laced with static. Jax was the optimistic one, the kid fresh from the academy who'd argued hardest for the vote, his eyes lighting up at scans of the rift's glowing veins. Now he sounded like he'd aged a decade. "Here," Elena replied, keying the mic, "what's your status? We've got partial power restoration, but the coupling's on its last legs." A pause, filled only by the distant groan of shifting stone. "Not good. The fissure opened wider overnight, swallowed half our sensor array. I'm suit sealed, but the air's thick with dust. And I think I saw movement down there. Not seismic. Something biological, maybe. Big." Marcus set down his welder, his face hardening. He was the cautious type, the one who'd voted against the push, citing the old surveys of predatory flora in the lower strata. "Biological? Jax, get eyes on it. Don't engage." Elena's stomach twisted. The planet, Epsilon 9, was a graveyard of failed colonies, its ecosystem a tangle of adaptive horrors that thrived on geothermal vents. They'd known the risks, but the alternative was starving in orbit, waiting for relief that might never come. She straightened, grabbing her toolkit. "Hold position, Jax. Marcus and I are suiting up. We'll link the rover's auxiliary power to your beacon, give you a defensible perimeter." The comms hissed back. "Copy that. But hurry. It's getting closer." Outside, the rift loomed like a wound in the twilight landscape, steam vents hissing plumes that caught the weak sunlight in ethereal veils. Elena and Marcus trudged through the regolith, their suit servos whining against the uneven terrain. The ground vibrated underfoot, a low rumble that set her teeth on edge. Marcus led, his scanner sweeping arcs, the beam cutting through the haze to reveal jagged outcrops veined with the telltale blue glow of isotopes. "Half a click to Jax," he said over the private channel, his breath steady despite the strain. "If it's a predator, we fall back to the habitat. No heroics." She appreciated his grit, the way he never let fear blunt his focus. "Understood. But if it's guarding the deposits?" Her voice trailed off as the scanner pinged. a cluster of heat signatures blooming at the fissure's edge. They crested a ridge, and there it was, Jax's outpost, a prefab dome half buried in scree, its lights flickering. Beyond, in the chasm's mouth, shadows stirred. Not rocks. Not wind. Long, sinuous forms uncoiling from the depths, their hides iridescent under the mineral light, tipped with fronds that quivered like sensing antennae. Contact, Jax's voice cut in, urgent but controlled. 3, no, 4 of them. Circling the dome. Elena's pulse quickened. The creatures moved with predatory grace, testing the air, their fronds brushing the dome's surface in probing sweeps. One reared up, its body elongating to twice a human's height, mandibles clicking audibly even through the suit's audio feed. Marcus deployed the power line, anchoring it with a spike driver that thudded into the ground. Linking now. Jax, activate the barrier field on my mark. As the energy surged, a faint hum built, the dome's emitters glowing to life. The nearest creature recoiled, fronds retracting, but the others pressed forward, their forms blurring in the dust-choked air. Elena unslung her pulse rifle. Not a weapon of war but a mining tool repurposed, its EMP bursts meant to stun rather than kill. She fired a warning shot, the crack echoing off the walls, scattering embers of ionized air. One beast lunged, slamming into the barrier with a force that made the dome shudder. Alarms blared in their helmets. Field holding at 60%. Jax shouted. Regroup inside, Elena ordered, covering their retreat. Marcus hauled the line taut, but a tremor hit then, sharp, unforgiving. The ground buckled, sending them sprawling. She rolled to her feet, tasting blood from a bitten lip, and saw it, the power coupling sparking, severed by a fresh crack in the earth. The creatures paused as if sensing weakness, their eyes, facets of glowing. Elena gripped the edge of the control panel, her knuckles whitening as the ship's alarms blared in staccato bursts. The vote had been unanimous 2 days ago. Push forward to the uncharted nebula for rare isotopes that could power their failing reactors. Now, with the vessel shuddering through ionized clouds, regret clawed at her gut like the static discharge crackling across the view screen. Captain, we're losing structural integrity in the forward bays, Jax called from his station, his voice steady but laced with that sharp wit he wielded like a tool. He wiped sweat from his brow, fingers dancing over holographic readouts. If we don't vent the excess plasma soon, this tub's going to fold like a bad poker hand. Marcus, hunched over his scanner in the corner, shook his head without looking up. His cautious nature had argued against this from the start, but the crew's desperation for fuel had drowned him out. I told you the readings were unstable. Those clouds aren't just dense, they're alive with electromagnetic pulses. One more surge and we'll be space debris. Elena straightened, forcing calm into her tone. The small bridge felt claustrophobic, lit only by the erratic glow of emergency lights. She glanced at the empty fourth chair where Lena, their medic, should have been, off in the med bay tending to the injured from the last jolt. 4 souls against the void, and every decision weighed heavier now. Options? She asked, eyes flicking between them. Jax leaned back, cracking a grim smile. We could reroute power from life support to the shields. Buy us time, but it'll get chilly. Real cozy. Marcus finally looked up, his face etched with lines of perpetual worry. Or we reverse thrust and limp back to the relay station. It's safer, but we'll burn what little fuel we have left. No guarantee we make it. The ship lurched again, a deep groan echoing through the hull like a beast stirring. Elena felt the vibration in her bones, a reminder of the cost already mounting, cracked bulkheads, flickering systems, and the unspoken fear of isolation in the black. She thought of the vote, the easy cheers in the mess hall, the hope that had masked the risks. Now it all tasted like ash. No, she said firmly, her bravery a shield against the doubt. We came for the isotopes. Jax prepped the venting sequence. Marcus, isolate the worst pulses, give me a window to deploy the probes. Jax nodded, already keen commands, his fingers a blur. Probes it is. Just don't blame me if they come back looking like Swiss cheese. As the alarms peaked, Elena hit the intercom. Lena, status? A crackle, then the medic's voice, tight with strain. 2 fractures, 1 concussion. Holding, but if we take another hit, we won't, Elena cut in, more resolve than certainty. The view screen flared with the nebula's heart, a swirling vortex of purple and gold that promised salvation or doom. She punched the release, watching the probes streak out like arrows into the storm. The first one winked out almost immediately, its signal lost in the interference. Elena's jaw tightened. Jax muttered a curse under his breath, rerouting frantically. Marcus's scanner beeped erratically, painting a chaotic map of the chaos ahead. "Come on," Elena whispered to the void, her hand hovering over the abort switch. The ship trembled but held for now. In that fragile moment, the weight of their choice settled deeper, a shadow lengthening across the stars. Elena gripped the console edge as the ship's hull groaned under another pressure wave. The vote had sealed their fate hours ago, but now, with the asteroid field's debris pummeling the shields, regret clawed at her throat. She glanced at Marcus, his fingers flying over the auxiliary controls, sweat beading on his forehead despite the recycled air's chill. "Diverting power from life support again," Marcus said, voice tight. "We can't keep this up. Shields are at 30%. Beside them, Kira hunched over the scanner, her cautious nature fraying into sharp commands. "There's a clear path through the outer ring, tight but doable. If we angle starboard 15 degrees now." The brave one, Tomas, nodded from the pilot's seat, his witty grin absent for once. He adjusted the thrusters with a steady hand, but Elena saw the tremor in his jaw. The plan they'd hatched after the vote, pushing through the field to reach the relay station, had backfired spectacularly. The asteroids weren't just rocks. They were laced with magnetic anomalies, pulling at the hull like invisible hands. A sharp jolt rocked the bridge, lights flickering. Alarms blared, red strobes painting their faces in bloody hues. Elena's stomach lurched as the gravity compensators stuttered, sending loose tools skittering across the deck. Impact on the port side. Kira shouted, her eyes wide behind the visor of her emergency suit. "Hull breach in cargo bay 2. Sealing it off, losing half our fuel reserves." Marcus cursed under his breath, rerouting what he could. "That's it. We're down to emergency thrusters. If we don't punch out soon, we're driftwood." Elena forced herself to think, the weight of the decision pressing harder than the debris. The vote had been unanimous. Risk the shortcut to save time, to outrun the corporate patrols chasing their stolen data core. Ingenuity over caution, they'd said. Human grit against the void. But now, with oxygen ticking down and the station's signal a faint whisper, she wondered if pride had blinded them all. Tomas banked hard, the ship protesting with a metallic screech. A massive boulder loomed on the view screen, tumbling end over end, its surface glittering with crystalline veins. "Hold on," he muttered, firing the maneuvering jets. The rock clipped the edge of their shield bubble, sparks erupting like fireworks against the black. Kira's scanner pinged, a narrow gap ahead, just wide enough. "There. Commit to it." Elena leaned forward, her voice cutting through the din. "Do it. But if we make it, no more shortcuts. We play smart from here." The ship surged forward, engines whining as they threaded the needle. Debris pinged off the hull like hail on tin, each hit a reminder of the cost. As the field thinned, the stars sharpened into focus, but the damage logs scrolled relentlessly, fuel critical, shields offline, and a hairline crack in the core chamber threatening the very data they'd voted to protect. Marcus slammed back, wiping his brow. "We bought some time. But the patrols? They'll sniff us out before we dock." Tomas exhaled, his grip loosening on the controls. "One crisis at a time. Let's see if this old girl holds together." Elena stared at the receding asteroids, their jagged forms fading like bad decisions in the rearview. The relay station's beacon grew stronger, a promise laced with peril. They'd survived the gamble, but the real test waited in the docking lights ahead. The dim hum of the habitat module's recyclers filled the air, a constant reminder that every breath was engineered. Captain Alara Voss wiped sweat from her brow, her calloused hands leaving a streak of grime across her forehead. She leaned against the bulkhead, watching as Jax tinkered with the jury-rigged console, his fingers dancing over exposed wiring like a pianist coaxing life from a dying instrument. The vote had passed 3 days ago, easy, unanimous even in the haze of desperation. Launch the probe into the storm front, map the anomaly, and pray it unlocked a path through the nebula's chokehold. Regret had slithered in faster, with the first solar flare scorching their outer arrays. "Jax, talk to me," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. Brave wasn't blind, it was pushing through the fear that clawed at her resolve. He didn't look up, his witty grin absent for once. "Power draw spiking again. That flare fried the relays worse than we thought. If we don't reroute soon, the probe signal cuts out and we're blind in this soup." His tools clattered softly, a sharp contrast to the muffled roar outside, where the nebulous plasma winds battered the ship's hull like impatient fists. Mira hovered nearby, her cautious nature etched in the way she clutched the diagnostic tablet, eyes flicking between readouts and the viewport. The swirling purples and electric blues of the nebula painted her face in ghostly light, but she saw only threats. "We should pull back." The vote was for mapping, not suicide. "One more surge and we're venting atmosphere." Her words hung, practical as always, but laced with the undercurrent of doubt that had grown since the decision. Ilara pushed off the wall, crossing the cramped space in 2 strides. The module smelled of ozone and recycled sweat, a far cry from the clean labs back on Earth. Pulling back means drifting. Resources are at 20%, food since first, then air. We adapt or we die out here. She placed a hand on Jax's shoulder, feeling the tension coiled there. Teamwork wasn't speeches, it was these moments, hands-on choices made. Jax straightened, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. A spark jumped from the console and he cursed under his breath. "Got it?" Rerouting through the auxiliary grid. But Myra's right, this anomaly isn't just a storm. Readings show gravitational eddies like it's pulling at us. The probe's data confirms it, something artificial buried in the heart. His eyes met Ilara's, the wit returning in a half-smile. Humans built ships to chase stars, not cower from them. But if we push, we might not like what we find. The ship shuddered, a deep groan echoing through the decks. Alarms blared briefly before Jax silenced them. Ilara glanced at the viewport, where a tendril of plasma licked the shields, illuminating the probe's faint trail like a comet's tail. The early plan had been simple: deploy, scan, retreat. But the flare had backfired, turning their ingenuity into a gamble. Now the anomaly pulsed stronger, its gravitational whisper tugging at the hull, promising answers or oblivion. Mira stepped forward, her caution yielding to necessity. "Fine. But we need a new vector. Calculate the eddies, use the probe's last ping." She tapped the tablet, her fingers precise, feeding data to Jax's console. For a moment the three stood in sync, the air thick with unspoken stakes. One wrong surge and the habitat cracked open to vacuum. One right move and they pierced the nebula's veil. Jax nodded, his setup humming to life. Vector locked. Engaging secondary thrusters. The ship lurched forward, engines whining against the pull. Ilara braced, heart pounding in rhythm with the engines. Outside, the nebula churned, a vast, indifferent beast. There were specks of grit in its maw, but humans didn't yield easy. As the probe's signal strengthened, flickering data streamed in, structures, vast and angular, woven into the plasma flows. Not natural. Ilara's mind raced. The vote's regret twisted deeper. Whatever waited ahead carried the weight of discovery's cost. A shadow passed over the viewport, too deliberate to be storm debris. Mira gasped, pointing. Incoming contact. It's matching our velocity. Jax's hands flew. Shields up, reroute complete. The console sparked once more but held. Tension coiled tighter, the adventure's earnest pull now laced with the sharp edge of survival. They pressed on, bound by choice and camaraderie, the nebulous secrets uncoiling like a trap sprung. The dim glow of the emergency lights cast long shadows across the control room, turning the scattered debris into jagged silhouettes. Elena gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles white, as the ship's alarms blared a relentless rhythm. She'd always been the steady one, the engineer who fixed what broke without fanfare, but now doubt clawed at her resolve. The vote had seemed so straightforward back on Earth. Colonize Epsilon Eridani's third planet, push the boundaries of human endurance. Now, with the atmospheric re-entry failing, regret tasted like the acrid smoke filling the air. Status on the thrusters? Captain Reyes barked from the command chair, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. He was all grit and unyielding focus, the kind of leader who'd stare down a black hole if it meant saving his crew. But even he couldn't hide the strain in his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly on the armrests. Javier, the navigator, hunched over his flickering holographic display, sweat beading on his forehead. Witty in calmer times, he now spat out facts with clipped urgency. Port side's at 20%, barely enough to correct our spin. If we don't stabilize in the next 2 minutes, we'll skip off the atmosphere like a stone and burn up on the rebound. Elena nodded, already moving. She yanked open a panel, sparks flying as she bypassed a fried relay. The ship, the Odyssey, groaned under the strain, its hull heating from the friction of Epsilon Eridani 3's turbulent upper atmosphere. The planet below was a swirling mass of ochre storms, promising fertile valleys but hiding seismic rifts that could swallow a landing site whole. Their challenge wasn't just the descent, it was the planet's unstable core, which had already triggered EMP bursts that crippled half their systems mid-approach. One wrong move, and the crew of 30 would be scattered across the void. Adapting auxiliary power, Elena said, her fingers dancing over exposed wiring. She rerouted energy from life support, a risky gamble that would drop oxygen levels if it failed. The air grew thinner, but she pushed on, her breath steady despite the burn in her lungs. Reyes watched her, trust etched in his silence. A sudden jolt rocked the ship, the console erupting in red warnings. Javier cursed. Electromagnetic pulse again, it's frying the inertial dampeners. The Odyssey lurched, gravity shifting wildly as they tumbled. Elena slammed the panel shut just as the lights dimmed further. Thrusters online, firing now. Reyes leaned forward. Hold her steady, people. We're not skipping today. The engines roared back to life, a guttural thunder that vibrated through the deck. The spin slowed, inch by agonizing inch, the planet's surface resolving from a blur into a vast, unforgiving canvas of crimson dunes and jagged peaks. But victory was fleeting. The pulse had weakened the structural integrity, and a hairline fracture spiderwebbed across the viewport. One more hit and they'd shatter like glass. Javier exhaled, slumping back. We're in the entry corridor. But the landing site's compromised, the rift activity shifted it 2 clicks east. We adjust now or we hit the storm wall. Elena wiped her brow, tasting salt and resolve. The vote had passed easily, dreams of new horizons blinding them to the planet's wrath. Regret passed faster, but so did the will to adapt. Reroute the NAV computers. I'll reinforce the landing struts from here. Reyes met her gaze, a nod passing between them, camaraderie forged in the fire of necessity. Make it count. As the Odyssey plunged deeper, the storm's fury battered the hull, winds howling like vengeful spirits. Inside, the crew moved as one, human ingenuity threading the needle between disaster and dawn. But the fracture widened, a silent promise of costs yet to come. The dim glow of the emergency lights cast long shadows across the habitat module, turning the once cozy bunks into jagged silhouettes. Elena gripped the edge of the control console, her knuckles white against the worn plasteel. The air recyclers hummed erratically, pulling in the acrid tang of overheated circuits, a reminder that their hasty vote to push through the nebula had cracked more than just the outer hull. We're losing pressure in the forward bay, she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Marcus, ever the engineer, was already elbow-deep in a tangle of wires, his brow furrowed under the beam of his headlamp. Got it, seals holding but barely, Marcus replied, not looking up. His hands moved with the precision of someone who jury-rigged half the ship's systems on the fly. If we don't reroute power from the AUX generators soon, that bay's gonna vent us into the void. He yanked a conduit free, sparks dancing like fireflies, and Elena felt the deck vibrate under her boots as another micrometeor skimmed the shields. From the corner of the module, Dr. Reyes watched, his cautious eyes flicking between the readouts and the viewport where the nebula's swirling gases painted the stars in bruised purples. He'd been the one to argue against the vote back on Luna Station, warning of the radiation spikes, but the crew, desperate for a shortcut to Epsilon Eridani, had overruled him. Now, with the ship's core temp climbing and their water reserves tainted by leaking fuel cells, Regret hung thicker than the fog outside. "We should have waited for the relay buoy," he muttered, more to himself than anyone. But waiting wasn't an option anymore. The alternative was drifting fuel-less in the dark. Elena nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead. The habitat's temp controls were shot, and the heat pressed in like an unwanted guest. She patched into the comms, her voice cutting through the static. "Javier, status on the drive core?" No response at first, just the faint crackle of interference. Javier, their pilot with the unbreakable grit, had volunteered for the EVA to manually prime the backups. Minutes ticked by, each one amplifying the distant groan of straining metal. Finally, his voice broke through, strained and breathless. "Core's priming, but the nebula's messing with the fields. I need more time, something's jamming the relays." Elena exchanged a glance with Marcus, who cursed under his breath and slammed a panel shut. Their initial plan, boost through the nebula's edge on minimal power, had backfired spectacularly when a surge fried the secondary arrays. Now Javier was out there, tethered by a single line, while the ship listed toward a denser gas pocket. Reyes stepped forward, his usual reserve cracking. "We can't leave him exposed. Pull him in and we'll limp on thrusters." But Elena shook her head, the weight of command settling heavier. Thrusters wouldn't cut it. They'd calculated the margins wrong, and regret whispered that the vote had doomed them all. "No. We adapt or we die." She grabbed a toolkit, slinging it over her shoulder. "Marcus, keep the seals tight. Reyes, monitor vitals. I'm suiting up to assist." The airlock cycled with a hiss, cold vacuum nipping at the edges of her suit as she emerged into the nebula's glow. Javier's figure floated ahead, a dark shape against the luminous haze, wrestling with a frozen clamp. Elena jetted closer, her thrusters firing in short bursts. "Talk to me," she said, arriving just as a fresh wave of interference lit up their huts. Clamps fused, radiations warping the metal, Javier grunted, his voice tinny over the link. Up close, she saw the sweat beading on his faceplate, the strain in his shoulders. Together, they pried at the mechanism, tools slipping in the zero-G dance. A sudden lurch rocked the ship, and Elena's tether yanked taut, the nebula's magnetic eddies pulling like invisible hands. "Hold on," Javier shouted, grabbing her arm. The clamp gave way with a metallic screech, but not before a shard of debris whipped past, scoring her suit's arm. Alarms blared in her helmet, pressure dropping. She clamped a patch over the tear, heart pounding as Javier finished the prime. The drive core thrummed to life below, a low rumble vibrating through the hull. Back inside, the module felt almost welcoming despite the rising heat. Javier slumped against a bulkhead, peeling off his helmet, while Elena patched her suit. Marcus hooped, slapping the console. "We're clear," nebulous thinning. But Reyes scanned the readouts, his face paling. "Water's still compromised and we've got hull microfractures. That vote bought us time, but the cost." He trailed off, the unspoken hanging. Lives, perhaps, or the dream of the new world. Elena met their eyes, the camaraderie forged in the void binding them tighter. "We push on. Smarter this time." Outside, the stars sharpened, but the nebulous shadow lingered, a promise of harder choices ahead. Elena crouched behind the jagged outcrop, her breath fogging the visor of her helmet in shallow bursts. The storm howled across the canyon, whipping red dust into a frenzy that clawed at the suit's seals. Below, the rover lay crumpled like a discarded toy, its frame twisted from the landslide Marcus had warned about hours ago. She glanced at the scanner readout, oxygen reserves dipping below 30%, and the comms still silent. Lila's voice had cut out mid-sentence during the descent, swallowed by static. "Damn it," Elena muttered, keying her suit's external mic. No response. She edged forward, boots crunching on brittle rock, eyes scanning for any sign of the others. The vote back on the ship had seemed so straightforward. Land here, mine the rare isotopes, get rich quick and bail before the monsoons hit. But regret had settled in like this dust, coating everything in a gritty haze. Now, with the shuttle grounded and supplies scattered, it felt like they'd voted to bury themselves alive. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Down in the ravine, a figure staggered upright, silhouetted against the flickering aurora. "Marcus." He waved an arm, then collapsed to one knee, clutching his side. Elena's heart punched against her ribs. She activated her thrusters in short bursts, descending the slope with controlled slides, gravel skittering away into the void. The wind buffeted her, threatening to yank her off balance, but she planted her grapple line into the cliff face, inching closer. By the time she reached him, Marcus was fumbling with a medkit patch, blood seeping through his torn suit from a gash across his ribs. "Took you long enough," he rasped, his usual wit undercut by pain. "Thought I'd have to improvise a distress signal with my last breath." "Save it," Elena said, pressing a sealant foam canister against the wound. It hissed as it expanded, staunching the flow. "Where's Lila?" He nodded toward a cluster of boulders, half buried under debris. "Trapped. I tried digging, but the rock slide shifted. If we don't get her out soon, that pocket's gonna flood with the next gust." Elena followed his gaze. The scanner pinged faintly, Lila's vitals weak but steady, her suit's emergency beacon pulsing like a dying star. No time for heroics. She pulled the portable laser cutter from her pack, its hum cutting through the gale as she powered it up. Marcus hauled himself to his feet, grimacing, and grabbed a stabilizer rod to brace the unstable ledge. Together they worked in tandem, the cutter slicing through stone while Marcus wedged the rod to prevent collapse. Sparks flew, illuminating the ravine's depths, where shadows twisted like forgotten regrets. Elena's arms burned, sweat stinging her eyes inside the helmet, but she pushed on. One wrong cut and they'd all be pulverized. A chunk of rock gave way, revealing Lila's helmeted face, smeared with dust, her eyes wide behind the glass. "Elena!" Her voice crackled through the comms, faint but alive. "Hold on," Elena replied, reaching in to unclip Lila's harness. Marcus extended the rod, creating a makeshift bridge, and with a coordinated pull, they dragged her free. Lila gasped as fresh air cycled into her suit, coughing against the strain. The three huddled against the outcrop as the storm peaked, a wall of red blotting out the sky. Marcus patched the comms array with salvaged wiring from his pack, his fingers steady despite the injury. "Ship's picking us up," he announced finally, the relief in his voice mirroring the easing tension in Elena's chest. "But the rover's toast. We'll have to hike back to the landing site on foot, double time before the isotopes destabilize in this weather." Lila nodded, wiping grime from her visor. "We almost lost everything down there. That vote, it was supposed to be simple." Elena met her gaze, the weight of it all pressing down. "Simple doesn't mean smart. But we're not done yet." She stood, helping the others up, the canyon's echo carrying their footsteps into the wind. The isotopes waited, a promise turned peril, but for now survival was the only vote that mattered. "I'm sorry, but I must follow the specified output rules and cannot include chapter headings or structured divisions." The chamber's air hung thick with the acrid tang of scorched circuits and unspent fury. Ilera wiped sweat from her brow, her fingers leaving a streak of grease across her skin. The console before her flickered erratically, its holographic display casting jagged shadows on the faces of the survivors clustered around it. Marcus leaned against the bulkhead, his breath ragged, one arm cradled protectively against his ribs where the shrapnel had bitten deep during the breach. Lena paced the narrow confines, her boots scuffing the grated floor, eyes darting to the viewport where the asteroid's silhouette loomed like a predator's jaw. "We can't hold them off much longer," Lena said, her voice steady but laced with the edge of exhaustion. She wasn't one for panic, never had been even when the colony vote had sealed their fate back on Earth, dooming this ragtag crew to the frontier's merciless grip. "The drones are adapting." That last salvo nearly cracked the hull. Marcus grunted, pushing off the wall with a wince. "Nearly isn't enough. We've got the override sequence prepped. Just need to punch it through their firewall without frying our own systems." His optimism was a forced thing born of necessity, but it anchored them. He'd been the one to argue for the mission's continuation when doubt had rippled through the ranks, his quiet conviction turning the tide. Ilera's hands flew over the keys, rerouting power from life support to the comms array. The ship groaned in protest, lights dimming to a sullen red. Outside, the rival miners' vessels swarmed like hornets, their automated sentinels probing for weaknesses in the derelict station they'd claimed as their last stand. The vote had passed easily, regret passed faster, indeed. What started as a desperate bid for rare isotopes had spiraled into this. A resource war on the edge of the void where one wrong move meant suffocation in the black. A proximity alarm blared, sharp and insistent. Lena spun toward the console. Incoming. 2 minutes, tops. Alara didn't look up. I've got a backdoor. Their AI's clever, but it's pattern-based. Humans aren't. She isolated a thread in the enemy code, a remnant of the old corporate protocols they'd all sworn to abandon. With a flicker of her wrist, she injected the virus. Marcus's design, a sly loop that mimicked their own defensive signatures while siphoning targeting data. The holograph shifted, enemy vectors twisting into a chaotic dance. Drones veered off course, colliding in a bloom of debris that lit the viewport like fleeting stars. Marcus straightened, a grim smile cracking his pain-lined face. It's working. Reroute their fire to each other. But the adaptation was swift. One drone broke free, its laser lancing toward the station's core. The impact shuddered through the frame, sparks erupting from a nearby panel. Alara stumbled, her console sparking wildly. Power surge, its feedback. Lena lunged forward, slamming the manual override. Hold it together. Her hands, calloused from years of wrenching or hollers, gripped the auxiliary controls, bleeding off the excess into the void vents. The ship stabilized, but not without cost. Their oxygen recyclers whined, efficiency dropping by a third. They'd breathe thinner air for weeks if they made it. Marcus keyed the final command, his voice a low murmur over the din now. The override flooded the enemy network, a cascade of false positives that turned their swarm against itself. Explosions chained outward, silent in the vacuum, reducing the threat to glittering scrap. Silence fell, broken only by the hum of straining systems. Alara slumped back, her brave facade cracking just enough to reveal the toll. We did it. But the hull? Half the isotopes are compromised from the fight. Lena nodded, scanning the readouts. Better than nothing. We get back, sell what we can, and rebuild. She glanced at Marcus, who was already binding his wound with a makeshift tourniquet. No speeches, no triumphs shouted to the stars, just the quiet camaraderie of those who'd bet everything and scraped by. As the station's thrusters fired, easing them away from the wreckage, the asteroid receded, a scarred monument to hasty choices. Regret lingered like the faint metallic taste on their tongues, a reminder that survival demanded more than votes or ingenuity. It demanded they carry the weight together into whatever came next.